Hello! In this tutorial I'll teach you how to create a page with the Scrum Board to manage the tasks of your employees. Something similar with this Scrum Board that we are seeing here, where we have the available tasks on the left side and then we have the Scrum Board on the right side with the employees list and the tasks phases on top, where I can change the tasks to different phases and I can assign tasks into different employees. I can edit and I can put notes in the tasks of employees, or I can simply edit a specific task and remove it, or add new task. Basically creating something like this. So how can I do this? The idea is to build this Scrum Board everything from scratch, so you can understand the full process. Another way of doing this, a faster way, is to go to our store, click in Programs, search for the Scrum program, download it and install it in your framework. But that's not the purpose of this tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial is to teach you how can you build all of this from scratch. Currently we are having the employees in the axis Y and the phases, the task phases in the axis X, but instead of having employees here we could have projects. So the idea is so you can learn how to build something like this, so in the future you can adapt this type of boards according with your needs. That's the focus of this tutorial. So first of all, let's log in our framework, choose the workspace, disable these tours, select the default projects, and let's create a new page called Matrix Scrum. After we have the page editor open with the selected templates, the next step is to create the structure so we can have something similar with this. So first step is to drag some divs here and starting creating the structure so we can have that same layout. So in here let's add some Bootstrap class, we're gonna use that based on Bootstrap. Let's enable the border so we can see the divs and what we are doing here. So in here let's add here column 3, let's add here another div which should be column 9, let's save and let's preview what we currently have. Let's put some minimum width in here, some minimum height, not width, the height. Just an example, we can make it 200. Okay, something like this with some spacing. In here, maybe we can make something like this. And this we can make maybe the spacing bigger. This is just an example. Something like this, okay. We can make this text center. Okay, something like this, so we can have this centered, whatever. Okay, so next step, now that we have our structure, what we want to do is to create our database structure. And in here what we see is we have a table tasks with which shows the list of tasks. We see that each task has a status or a phase. We see that we have employees, and each employee can have tasks assigned. So we're gonna have 4 tables. So let's create that 4 tables. So let's create first the employee table. We can erase all these dummy attributes that the system creates by default. The employee will gonna have a name. We're gonna have the task table. Each task we're gonna have a phase, so we're gonna have a task phase table, so we can have the phases of each task. And the tasks will have a name too, or a title, whatever. And then we're gonna have another table, which will be the employee tasks, which makes the relationships between the employees and the tasks. So we can just simply erase all these fields, and in here we want to have the task ID. We want this primary key from another table, not auto increment primary key. We want primary key from another table, which is this one comes from the employee and this one comes from the task. Additionally, we can add another attribute called notes, so we can add some notes specifically when a task is assigned to an employee. Okay, so we just add, and we have here our tables. Okay, so we have the task phase, the employee, and the employee task. Okay, so the employee, let's add some default records in our database. Then let's add in the task phase, let's add some phases, default phases in our database. So we're gonna have the standby phase, we're gonna have the working on it phase, we're gonna have the finished, and wait, we're gonna have the cancelled. The cancel phase. Okay, perfect. Additionally, we can create some dummy tasks. So there is something missing here, which is the task we're gonna have a phase. So we can just drag and drop the task phase inside of the task table, so we can have the foreign key task phase ID in here. So when I manage here the records, it already appears here. So I can create a new phase, where I can select a specific phase, or I can leave it as null, and I can put here a new phase called task A, and I can create another one saying task B. Something like this, very simple. Okay, so since I have my database structure created, what I want to do now is to go back to my page editor of the Matrix Scrum page. And in here, now in this div, I want to convert this to a list group and to show here the available tasks that I have in my database. So I'll open the dynamic properties and I go here and I select list group. And automatically by doing that, I have a bunch of functionalities that are available here. So first thing to do is go to the load resources and load a new resource, which will be select all the tasks from the database, get multiple records list. I do updates and the system makes this on selection, selects the handler, which is correct, selects the load type, which is the on-page loads, correct, and I want to do something else in here, which is I need to define here the primary keys. And the primary keys of the tasks table will be the task ID. The same thing that we create here, primary key of the task table is the task ID. Okay, so first part is done. What I want to do next is, now I need to tell to the system for each record what it should draw in here. So I need to drag and drop the div inside of here, and inside of this div, so I want to make this the full height. Let's just add here a class, so this can be the full height, where in here will appear all the tasks inside, because I'll have here appear the lists, and above I'll have a button to add, basically to add new tasks. So the same thing that we are seeing here. Okay, and inside of here now I need to tell to the system that for each record of the tasks replicate this element here. So I need to change this element to be a dynamic widget, which should be a row item, this type here, row item. And inside of here automatically I'll have the name and a button. So I'll have in here inside I'll have another div which will contain the name, and then I'll have the button in here. Okay, so when I select this div I need to go to the display resource attributes properties, and in here I need to put the name of the task. So this is the attribute, this attribute here that contains the name of the tasks. Okay, and in here will be the button, where in this case I want to add some classes here, so it can be a beautiful button where it should say edit. Here this button should say add. I need to add some classes too. By default I add some dimensions, so I want to clean that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so if I save this and if I preview, I have here my add button, but currently I'm not seeing here the lists of the tasks. So let's see it why. So this element here, first of all let's add here some classes. So I want to have some margins, I want this to be border, I want to have backgrounds, I want this to be rounded, something like this. Okay, so let's see. Okay, these first widgets, the load type, okay, is missing here the load type. This needs to be on page loads. That's what was missing. Okay, so now if I refresh this on page load, it is creating the corresponding the two tasks that I have in my database that I created by default. Okay, maybe we can put this as the text aligned to the left, and maybe we can put some padding to whatever. Okay, something like this. Okay, to be more or less similar. Okay, the padding here is a little bit more, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so next step, what we want to do is in here, when I click in the add button, what I want to do is to show a pop-up to add new tasks. And then when I click in this edit button, I want to show another pop-up to edit the existing task or to delete. So let's do the add button. So first of all, I need to go to click in the add button, and I need to go to the dynamic widgets properties and to convert this button into an addable button, which is this button here. Okay, where in here I want to open the add pop-up, and I need to put the ID of the pop-up that I didn't create, but I will create just after. So let's put add task pop-up. let's copy, and now let's create the pop-ups here below. Okay, so let's scroll down, let's go to the Bootstrap model. We are using the Bootstrap libraries, but we could use some other library, it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's erase this button, that comes by default, that doesn't matter for us. Okay, and in here what we want to do first is to select the pop-up element, so the main element of the pop-up, of the model in this case. And what we want to do is to convert this as a pop-up and a pop-up addable. So pop-up and a addable pop-up. Okay. Next, we want to add a form in here, so we can add some elements here, so then we can have the add button to execute the specific action into the database. So we need to add the form. So we scroll up, we go to the forms, and we add the form here, and we copy all these elements inside the form. So all of this, we have done this before in the previous tutorial, so I will not explain this very well because we have done this before. Okay, so we have here this form here. Okay, so the next step is we want to change this title here, saying add task. In here we want this to be ads, maybe we want here, instead of being primary, we want to be success. Okay, and next step, what we want to do is we want to go to the form. We want to convert it to a dynamic widget too, where we will select the type form, and automatically we'll have these options here available for us, where in here we're gonna add a new attribute name called name. Ignore this error, doesn't really matter, because what we want to do is just to have this piece of code so the system can generate this automatically for us. So then we can just copy this inside of here, and we can simply erase this guy here. Okay, so basically we are almost done. What we need to do now is on the add button, we want to ask to say, when I click here, I want to trigger a specific resource in the form. And so we need to create that resource. So basically what we want to do is, when I click in this button, add button, so when I click on the add button, what I want to do is to execute this event here, add resource item. That basically will execute the resources, the add resources that are defined in the forms, just like it says in here. So I do update, okay, and when I go to the form, I need to go to my add resources in here, and I need to create a new resource that will be add a record for the task table, and I do update. Okay, done, is done. Additional, when this executes correctly, I want to close the pop-up, and besides closing the pop-up, I want to refresh the main list. So, but for now, let's just save this and let's preview what we currently have. Okay, when I click here, add pop-up, oh, we forgot to set the ID of the pop-up. So I should select the pop-up ID here, and we need to put here the ID that we defined in this add button, which was, let's check it, okay, add task pop-up. Okay, so we select here the pop-up, and in here in the ID, we just change the ID. We save, we refresh the page, and voila, here it is. Now we have the pop-up. So if I add something here, if I do add, apparently it is adding. So if I refresh the page, the task is here. Okay, so the first part is done. What we need to do is to refresh this automatically. So to do that, we need to create a dependency between the form and this list here. So the list that loads, that has the load resource defined, which is this element here, we need to create here an ID. So let's call it available tasks. And in the form, we need to set the dependency with that specific ID that we created, which was the available tasks. So every time that we add something here, it will refresh the available tasks. So if I add now something, it's refreshed automatically, and here it is, the new task that we created. If we want to go to our database, if we press the manage records together with the control key, it will open a new tab here where I can see that I have my tasks in here in the database. So first step is done. Second step is to define these edit buttons. So when I click in this edit button here, what I want to do, first I want to convert this into a button, which in this case will be a button to open an editable pop-up with item details. So I want to select the open item edit pop-up ID, and in here I need to put ID of the pop-up that we didn't create but we'll create after. So edit task pop-up. This is the ID of the pop-up that we'll create. Okay. So now let's create another pop-up here. So let's go to the model again. Here model. Let's put it here down. Select the same one. We can erase this field here. Let's set the ID of the pop-up so we don't forget as we did so we did with the other pop-up. Okay. We need to convert this as an editable pop-up too, so we need to scroll this down. We need to set this pop-up, editable pop-up. Now we need to add the form in here. Let's move all these fields inside, the same thing that we did before. Okay, perfect. Let's change this to be edit tasks instead of be add task, and let's select the form. Let's convert it to a form type. Okay, so we can have these features here available, and now let's add in here the attributes to show, which will be the name. Ignore the error, so we can have this field, this element here, so we can simply copy it. Okay, perfect. So we already have these set. Okay, next we want to save this element here. So we need to go to the form. The same thing. We need to trigger in the button. We need to, when we click the button, we need to tell to the system that we want to execute the update resource that is defined in the form. So in this case now I need to select the form and go to the update resource. I need to go here, update resource. In here I need to choose, for the task I need to choose the query type update the record, and the system creates this automatically for us. Additionally, I need in the form to set the primary keys. So in here I need to say that the primary keys for this specific form, this specific table, which is the task, it is the task underscore ID. Okay. Additionally, I want this to show the information, the data of the task that I'm opening. So I need to define a load resource. So I go to the load resources, and in here for the task I do get a specific record. Okay, and this is on page loads, load form. I don't want this to be on page loads because this will be triggered when the pop-up gets triggered, and there is something missing. So in here we need to have in here an ID too. So let's put here add task form, and add task form, and basically this form needs to be dependable of the pop-up. So we need to go to the pop-up, and in the dependencies of the pop-up we need to set that specific form that we created. So every time that we open the pop-up we want to trigger the load resource of the form, so that's why we need here a dependence. And additionally, in the form, every time that I update a resource I want to close the pop-up and I want to refresh the available tasks list. So I need to create here a dependency too for the available tasks. So if I save this and if I refresh the page, when I click here I can see that it's showing the corresponding information. If I save, it refreshes automatically the available lists here. Next, what we're gonna do is, in this pop-up, I want to have another button to delete that record. So let's just copy this button here, or instead of copying, let's just drag and drop so we can do it from scratch so you can understand the full process. Okay, so we just copy the button here. Let's add some classes here. We're in here, let's put it remove. Okay, and what we're gonna do in here is to define on-click event, saying that when I click in this event, I want you to execute the remove resource defined in the form. So I need to go to my form, and in the resources, in the remove resource, I want to create a new resource to remove a record for the task. And when this happens, I want to close the pop-up. Maybe if I want to show a message. We could have done this for the other resources that we created here. The update resource, we could have done this, the message. We just do this for this message, it's just an example. Saying task removed. We can add a confirmation message. Are you sure? Something like this. And when we save, and when we refresh the page, when I click add, now I have a remove button here. When I click, it's showing the confirmation message. If I put cancel, it doesn't do anything. If I click OK, it removes, it shows me the message and refreshes the list that is just below it. So this is just an example. So now we can put here task C. This is just an example. So the first part is done. So we have a pop-up to add new tasks, and we have the edit button that allows us to edit the current tasks or to remove existing ones. However, we just want to list the tasks here that are not assigned to any of the employees. So if we realize in here, when we drag and drop a task from here to here, automatically gets assigned to an employee and disappears from the availables list. So what we want to do is to show, instead of showing all the tasks in here, we just want to show the tasks that are not assigned to any employees. So what we want to do is in here, we just want to show the tasks that are not inside of this employee underscore task table. So to do that, let's scroll up and let's try to understand the logic that we have done. So when we click in these widgets, if we scroll down to the resources, we realize that we are loading the task resource. This task resource, if we open the main settings, the resource tab, we can see that the tasks is these tasks here. So the resource is this resource here, where is calling the getAll method from this object here. So if we see what is the logic inside of these methods, basically this logic here will simply call another logic or a business logic service, which is a business logic service, which is the task resource service getAll, which is, if we go here, it will be the task resource service and the getAll method. And inside of these getAll methods, what this method will do, will call it another business logic, which will be the task service getAll, which is this method here, and inside of these methods, that's where we're gonna find the action that will fetch the records from the database, from the task table, this task table here. And the corresponding action that does that thing is this task in here, the dbDAO action task or action. So if we enlarge the properties, if we expand here the properties, we are seeing that we are getting all the objects from the dbDAO name. This will be the, in this case, will be the task table. So what we want to do is to change this method here to be find relationship objects, where in here we need to change the attributes, where basically we want to list all the attributes from the task, the table task. And what we want to do now is to say, give me only the records here that are not in this table here. So we need to create a join between these two tables. So we need to go here to the keys and say that the task underscore ID, so the attribute task underscore ID from the task table, it will be equal to the task underscore ID attributes from the employee task table, which is in here, where we want to have here a left join, because we want this to be a left join where we want the employee ID to be equal to null. So in the parent conditions we want to put here employee underscore task dot employee ID is null. And if we save this, if we refresh here, it should be everything okay. Okay, so it's returning all the tasks because currently we don't have any records in here. So if we go here to the manage records and if we press Ctrl at the same time, it will open another tab where in here we don't have any records. As soon as we add a records in here saying employee ID 1 and task ID 1, if we refresh, we should not see that corresponding task, which is the task A. Here it is. So this is just an example. So what we're gonna do next is basically to draw this part here, which is this matrix here. So to draw this Scrum board, let's go back to our page editor. Let's collapse the resources, and in this div here, let's drag and drop the matrix widgets, and let's configure this widget here. So what we need to do here is we're gonna use the layers tab in here because we want to select the row of the add section of this matrix, so this row here inside of the table add, and we want to load a new resource here that will show the task phases in the axis X. So we'll show the task phases to get multiple records in the axis X as it shows in here. That's what we want to do. Additionally, when we do this load resource, the system selects this load type on page load. We want to disable this to none because this resource is going to be executed when we execute the matrix itself, this matrix here. Additionally, besides loading all the task phases in the axis X, we want to say that for each phase he will display the corresponding name of the task phase. So we click in this column, we go down to the display resource attributes and we say display resource name, the attribute name, the name, which is this name here. Additionally, we forgot to do something, which is to define the primary key. So it's very important. So selecting the row. So when we do the load resource of this task phase, we cannot forget to define the primary keys in here, saying that the primary keys for this load resource, it will be the task phase ID. And now we do the same thing for the body row. So we select the body row, we do the load resource, but now we want to show the employees to get multiple records, where in here we want this to be none, the load type, and we need to define the primary keys, which will be employee ID, and now we want to show in here the name of the employee, which is inside of the attribute name in here, name. Okay, so first part it is done. So the idea is we're gonna have in the axis Y the list of employees with the employee ID, and in the axis X we're gonna have the task phases with the task phase ID as the primary key. Next, we want to select the matrix widgets, and we do want to do the load resource, which in this case will be the employee task. And we need to define the primary keys too. In this case, we leave the page load, so when we execute this load resource, it will execute these other two that we defined previously. So now we scroll down, we need to define the primary keys. We just want to show these items here, the items that exists. And the primary keys will be for the employee task will be the employee ID, the task ID, and we need one more that is not here. So because we have here the employee IDs in the axis Y, we have the task phase IDs in the axis X. The system to draw these items here, they need to have the cross-reference of both primary keys. But in this table we only have the employee ID and the task ID. We don't have the task phase ID. So we need to then change this load resource that was created to include this guy here. So then we can have the task phase ID. That we're gonna put here for now, the task phase ID, because we need this task phase ID. So the system can draw this part here, this item column here, for the existing elements that you will find in the database. But for now, we need to define them in here, in the primary keys. So if we save this, if we refresh this, we can see that the system is already drawing the employees and the phases, but is not drawing the item columns. That's because when we select this load resource, so when the system creates this employee task resource, it's only getting these two primary keys. So we need to change this, the corresponding action that fetches this data from the database. We need to change this and to do an inner join, or in this case to do a join together with this task here, so we can show the task phase ID. So to do that, we see here employee task, that's the resource that we are loading in these widgets. So we open the main settings, we go to the resource tabs, and we search for this resource, which is the employee task resource that is in here. And this resource is calling these methods get all from this object here, the resource util object. And inside of this resource util, we need to find basically the task or the action that we're gonna call another business logic that will be the resource service, the get all. And inside of this resource service, we're gonna find a business logic action that we're gonna call the service.getAll. And inside of that method, it's where we're gonna find the action that will fetch the data from the database, and is that method that we need to change. So basically, we have here the task, the employee task resource util in here and in the top. This one calls the employee task resource service, so resource util calls the resource service, and the resource service calls the employee task service. And inside of this method getAll, inside of the service, and all these methods are inside of here. So inside of here, you have a task called dbDAO action, and this action it's the corresponding the responsible action to fetch the data from the database. So what we are doing here is to getting all the data from the employee tasks table. What we need to do is to change this to find relationship objects, where in here we need to define the keys, where we're gonna say, so the employee task dot task ID, so the attribute task ID inside of the employee task table will be equal to the task ID attribute inside of the task table, and needs to be inner join. and then we want to show all the attributes from the employee task together with the task phase ID from the table task, and additionally the name of the task too, where in here we can give it an attribute called task name. Okay, so there will be no conditions and it is correct. So when we save this, when we refresh in here, okay, so let's do some debug. So when we refresh, when we get the employee tasks, the employee task, we can see that we are having here this, but is not having the task phase ID. Why is that? Okay, that's because in our database, so we can close all of these. So in our database, when we set, so if we do manage records together with the control key, we can see here that task A, that is the task that we are getting from here, the task A, doesn't have any phase, that's why it's not appearing here. So if in here we just do edit, and we put some dummy phase, doesn't matter which one, and if we save, now we have here a phase. Now if we refresh this, we can see that now it appears the corresponding item column. So this is working fine now. So what we need to do now is the next step, so I can close this. The next step is to go here and edit this part here. So to be similar with this, so we want to show the task name and a button to edit that correspondent task of the employee. So we need to go here, let's go here, get the widgets, let's drag a block in here and let's drag a button in here. So inside of this div, what we want to do is we want to display the resource attributes, which in this case will be the task name. So when we edit that resource in here, when we're editing here, we show the name of the task as the task name. So that's the attribute that we need to put here to show the corresponding task name. And additionally, we can erase these guys here, doesn't really matter this one anymore. So this button we can give a class, some classes. Okay. And now if we save and if we refresh the page, we can see in here the corresponding task name. So now we can add some classes in here too, so it can be similar with this other board in here. Okay, something like this. Missing these classes, rounded. Okay, now we can see there is much more similar. Okay, so now we need to take care about this button here because currently it's not doing anything. Okay, so now we click in this button. We classify this button as a button to open editable pop-up with item details, where in here we want to execute the open item edit pop-up by ID, where in here we need to put the corresponding pop-up ID. And so we need to create a pop-up which we're gonna have the ID of edit employee task pop-up, something like this. Okay. And now we can scroll down and let's drag and drop a new model So we can create our new pop-up. We can erase this field, this button here, that doesn't matter. And in this pop-up here, I want to have a new ID, which is the edit employee task pop-up, where in here will be edit employee task, something like this. Okay, now what we want to do to show in here the correspondent data for that employee task, first we need to put a form and put all of these elements inside of a form. So let's drag and drop the form inside of here, this element. Let's move all these other elements inside. Right, not here. I want it to be here. Okay. Okay, and now we can set this pop-up. Let's classify it as an editable pop-up. Pop-up editable, and this form here needs to have an ID, because every time that I open this pop-up I want to load the corresponding resources inside of the form. So let's put here edit employee task form, and inside of the pop-up I want to create a dependency for that form. And now in this form here, I go to my properties here, I classify it as a form. And now that I have these options here, I want to show here the notes. So ignore this error, because I just want to have this field created automatically just to be faster. Okay, here will be the notes. So in here I want to convert this to a text area. Okay, notes. And I want to show two more other attributes, which will be the task ID and will be the name of the task. Okay, in this case I want to pass this below at the bottom. Okay, so I have the ID, the name and the task. Where this one I want to convert this text field to a spam. Okay, because this is not editable, this could be editable and this will be editable. But where in here, so okay, so next phase is, let's just save and let's see if this is working for now. If when I click edit I can see that I have my pop-up where this is not editable and these are editable fields. Okay, so what I want to do next is when I click edit I want to load the correspondent information to show it in this pop-up. So to do that, let's select the form and I want this to be to create a new load resource, which should be employee task, but this time will be a get specific record. So I do update, the system does this automatically for us, but it sets the load type, and in here I want the load type to be on page load. I want this to be none, because this load type, it will only be executed, it will only be triggered when the pop-up gets open, and the pop-up gets open only for specific records, passing the corresponding primary keys. So then the system knows what the record should load in here. So it creates this employee task resource. This employee task will get all these three attributes basically. So in here I want to show the task ID, which is here task ID. In here will be the task name, but I don't have any task name here, so I need to change that resource to add here a name. And in here will be the notes, which is the notes in here. Okay, but we can, for now we can just simply save it and see if it is currently working. So when we do edit, we can see that it's showing the correspondent ID. The notes is not showing because there are no notes. So if you want to add some notes here, just to be sure that everything is working fine, press the Control key together with the Manage Records menu, and in here we can edit something dummy just so we can have some default data. So when we refresh the page, when we click edit, we can see that appears here the corresponding information. Now the next step, what we want to do is in here we want to show the corresponding name. So let's try to find, so in the form, we know that the form, the resource that is getting loaded is the employee task. So let's go to the main settings, the resource tab, and let's find that resource, which is in here, employee task in here, which basically is calling the resource util the get method. And this resource util get methods, what it does is calls the business logic, the resource service get. So resource util calls the resource service, and the resource service calls the service get. The service get, and it's inside of the service get that we have the action that we want to connect with the database and fetch the correspondent values in the database. So what we want to do is in this db-DAO action class, in this db-DAO action or task in this case, we want to change this. Instead of being find objects, we want this to be find relationship objects, where we need to set the keys saying that, so it's the employee task dot task ID. So the attribute task ID from the employee task will be equal to the task ID of the task table. And additionally, I want to show the attributes, all the attributes from the employee task table, and the name from the task table, where the name here I can put it in alias saying task name, something like this. Something similar that we did to show this part here, to show all the employees' tasks. Something similar that we did before. So that's what we are doing in here. So let's check if everything is correct. So we have the keys, we are having these, okay, so it should be fine. Now don't forget that the name that we are putting now here task name. So the task name, what we need to do in here, we are showing the name, not the task name. So in here we need to change this to be task underscore name. And let's refresh, and voila, here it is. Now it shows the corresponding task name. So now the next step is to, when I click save, I want to change all this data here. So to do that, what I want to do is when I click here save, I want this button to trigger. When I click save, I want this button to trigger the update resource item. That basically what we're going to do is to trigger the update resource that is defined in the form. So I do update, and in the form I want to set a new update resource. In the form I want to set update resource, which will be for the employee task, but will be an update record. So if I save this, if I refresh this, and now if I edit something here, if I click save, it's giving an error. And let's see why it's giving an error. So we have here, let's see, we have here our resource created, which is the update employee task resource, which is calling this. Here it is correct. Let's do some debug. So when let's choose the network tab here. When I save something here, he's not sending the ID. Okay, that's because I forgot to define in the form. I need to define the primary keys. So I need to define in here, I need to define the primary keys of the employee task, which will be the employee ID and the task ID. So now when I refresh this, when I click edit and when I click save, now I can see that he's passing the corresponding employee ID and task ID, which is correct, and he's making the change. So additionally, what I want to do, let's add some in the update resource, let's add some message. Well, first, when this resource gets executed correctly, let's close the pop-up, and then let's show a message saying save successfully, or just save, just to be faster. Otherwise, you show another message saying error, just so we know that it really saved. Okay, so when I click refresh, if I click edit, if I put here something, if I click save, it says already saved. If I do edit again, I can see that I have here the numbers that I changed. If I do refresh, I can see that I have the numbers here, so it is working fine. Now, if I change what I want to do, I want to add another action. When I edit something here, if I do save, I want it to change the task name too, but currently it's not changing. So to do that, what I need to do is in the form, when I'm calling the update resource, so this update resource here, what I need to do is to add another task here to update not only this table but to update the task table too, which basically we have done this before. We already have here that task, so we need to copy basically this part here inside of here. So let's add a new action, which in this case will be call object group. I'm gonna move it up. We want to execute this task only if this previous was executed successfully, and we want to put then the result, the status, in the same variable. And then in here we want to find that correspondent correspondent method. So we need to find it in the utils resource, task resource util, and we want to have the update resource. So we do update, we fill the correspondent fields in here, so we can just go up here and copy them. Here. Values and here conditions. Okay. And we can save this. Now, I want to show you something, because if I refresh, this will still give an error or it will not do anything. I'll explain this why. So when I click here, edit, when I click save, so the system is sending the task name, but this method that we created now, so the update task, this update inside of the task, receives the attributes but doesn't receive the task name, receives the name. So what I need to do is I need to go here in this field here, and I need to change it with the name. Put here the name of this text field should be name. So when the system sends the correspondent value of this input, sends with the name. So if now I refresh, and if now I click edit, if I do save changes, I can see that here now it appears correctly, the name. So when I go here and I change this to something, if I do save, if I refresh here, the system, it's already correct with the correspondent, with the correct name. Now what I want to do is when I click save, I want to refresh this matrix here. So how can I do that? So what I need to do is in the matrix I need to set an ID for the matrix widgets. So let's call it here Scrum Board. Scrum Board. And then in the form, where we were before, in the form, we need to set a dependency. Scrum Board, it's here. So we want to relate this form with the matrix. So every time that we do update, it will refresh the Scrum board. So when we save, and attention because this now will give an error, but we'll fix this error later. So when I'm here, if now I put task A, if I do save, it saves this, but it's giving an error here to refreshing this. Why is that? Because the employee, when we change the query here, now it doesn't know that we are passing the employee ID and the task ID equal to 1, because you are the IDs of the corresponding task that we're editing in the pop-up. So these IDs here, he doesn't know if they belong to the employee task or if they belong to the task table, because now we have here two tasks, where these two tasks, they share the task ID. So it doesn't know, so it needed to put in here. There is two ways of fixing this, which is one, or we go to the correspondent logic and we change this and we put here all the conditions they are passed here corresponds to the employee task. So we put here a prefix, say employee task dot employee ID, employee task dot task ID. Or we go to the correspondent logic code and we change this, or we can simply go here to the correspondent resource. So the matrix, I don't know if you remember, but the matrix is loading the employee task resource. So we go to this resource here. So we collapse everything so we can see this better. We go to the employee tasks resource in here, and we can simply disable the search. So if we simply disable the search by erasing that field over there, when we refresh this, when we click edit, when we put something here, it saves this and it refreshes automatically here, as you can see. Some notes, save. So voila. So this is basically just an example, just to show you how can you have this part here almost done. So the next step, what we need to do is basically to do the drag and drop part. The drag and drop is to move the tasks from the availables list into the board, or from the board to the availables list. That's the purpose. So to do that, we're gonna set into these elements, we're gonna set some draggable elements and some drop elements. So let's first start click in this element here, which contains the availables lists, and in here let's scroll down until we have the event section, and let's scroll down until we see the drag events. So in here we want to set this and this element here as a droppable. So to do that, we're gonna set this on drop event. And additionally, we're gonna set the on drag over, which is when we are dragging something over these droppables, let's change the background color, or let's change the class of these elements. So to do that, I already have here some JavaScript codes that I'm gonna use it. So I'll just copy paste these codes and I'll append the code into our page. So to do that, I'll just scroll down until the end of the page, and in here I just scroll until the end, open the advanced sections, and I'll drag and drop the script widgets. Where in here I'll open the properties and do paste of these codes. Okay, and the code is here. Okay, so let's analyze that code. But before, let's just open again the properties of this div, and let's scroll down until we see the on drag over and on drop over. So what we want to do next is, in here, in these codes, we want to analyze what we have in this code. So this function on drag over, what this does is sets a class called over to the current droppable element. So when we are dragging, every time that we cross over a droppable element, it will set the over class. Okay, so what we can do, we can just copy this class and go here to the drag over and put drag over with passing the event variable, which is a global variable from the window, from the browser, and we are passing this variable into this function, drag over. And we're gonna do the same thing in this element here. Next, we want to set the onDrop event. The onDrop, we're gonna call this function here, which is the drop function. This function, basically what it does is every time that receives a draggable element, it sends a request to the server, executing the correspondent request, saving it to the database, and if that request, if that action is successfully done, then it will append the new draggable element to the correspondent droppable. So what we want to do is to copy this drop function here and put it in here, passing again the event. And we want to do the same thing into this div, into this element here. Okay, so now we have the droppables element set. Now we want to set the draggables element. So these will be one draggable element and these will be another draggable element. So for the draggable elements, we're going to set the onDrag event and the onDragStart event. Additionally, we need to set an attribute called draggable equal to true, because that's what it says to the browser, that this element, it is a draggable element. Okay. Additionally, let's go here on drag. We want to copy the function drag, this function here, passing the correspondent event, where basically the only thing that this function does is to remove the overclass from the current droppable. That's it. So then it can add to the next one, to the next droppable. So let's copy here drag event, and in here the same thing. Okay, now we need to set the onDragStart. The onDragStart function, basically what it does is simply to save the corresponding draggable elements into a global variable, into the draggable element variable that is defined in here in the top, and we are making this as global. And we save. We preview the page, and these elements should be already draggables. So when we drag something here, is dragging the here, is giving an error, but that's because we didn't define yet the resources for the server. So as you can see, it is dragging correctly. Now let's create the overclass. So to create the overclass, every time that we create the droppables, it will set the overclass to that droppable. So what we want to do, we want to create the overclass by scrolling the page down and drag and drop the style widget here. Where in here, in the properties, what we're going to do is simply create an overclass where we're going to define the background color as yellow. Something like this, very simple. Okay, so we just save. We can scroll all of this up if we wish to, and we can refresh the page. So now every time that we drag that widget, we can see that it sets the over, or in here. So in here we can add here, there is a class that is missing to align the text to the left. We just realized this now, so we can go here and put this text start. Because we had that class in here, but we didn't have the class in here. Okay, and there is something different. So in here is M2, in here is M2. As a matter of fact, I can just copy these ones, and in here I can just do this and erase these other classes. Okay, now it is exactly the same. Okay. So if I save, and now when I move here, okay, exactly the same styling. Okay, perfect. Now the next step, what we want to do is simply to create the correspondent requests. So the system executes every time that I do a drag and drop, the system executes the request to the server and saves that correspondent moving action into the database. So to do that, what we're gonna do, and this advanced tutorial. So what we're gonna do is, I already have some code prepared for doing that, so I'll just copy paste that code. But before we do that, let me just show you and explain to you what is this JavaScript code that we copy paste in here. So let's just open here this editor. So basically this editor, that's where we set the draggable, the drag over function that I already explained, that basically sets the over class to the droppables. Then we had the drop function that we can just move here. That's basically what it did, was simply execute the server requests according with the moving action of a draggable element. Then this was to set the droppables elements. Then for the draggable elements, we create the drag start, which just saves the draggable element into a global variable, and the drag function, which basically what it does is just removes the overclass from the droppables. And then we have here some other functions that these other functions call. Basically the get droppable, based on an event, based on the mouse event, it returns the correspondent droppable element. Then we have, for last, we have the move task function, and this function basically what it does is sends the request to the server according with the moving action that we did based on a draggable element. So basically it receives the draggable elements, receives the new droppable and the old droppable elements. So what it does is gets for the new droppable elements, it gets the primary keys for the axis X. So if we see in here, so for the axis, so if we drag for this column will have the primary keys for the axis X, and will have the primary keys for the axis Y. So first you get the primary keys for the axis X, as we are seeing here. Then it gets the primary keys for the axis Y. It gets the primary keys for the axis Y. So in here we'll get task phase ID for this specific phase. And then in here you'll get the employee ID for the specific employee. And then it combines both. So it gets basically an object where that object will gonna contain the employee ID equal to whatever the ID it is, and the task phase ID equal to whatever the name it is. So probably this is 2, so it will be employee ID equal to 2 and the task phase ID equal to 3. Then we'll get the draggable, the primary keys for the item, for the draggable element. So this element here already has some primary keys. These primary keys will be the employee ID and the task ID. So related with this table here, the employee ID and the task ID. These are the primary keys related with this task A. So that's what we're gonna have in this variable. And then what it does is, if the element is outside of the Scrum board, meaning there is inside of the availables list. So if I drag and drop this task in here into this list here, it will execute this code. That basically it sends a remove request to the server, removing the correspondent record from the employee task. So if I do this, so if I move the task from this board into this list, what I want to do is to remove the correspondent record from this table. So that's what this does. So it will call the correspondent resource remove that is defined in that board that we didn't do that yet. So that's what this function does. Then if the task was previously in the tasks list, so if the task is in here, and now if it is, and then if we add that to the board, so if I do something like this, the system will execute the add resource defined in the matrix widgets. Basically send a request to the server, inserting a new record into the employee task table. Because I am moving from here to here, so I'm creating a new record here. So that's what we are doing here. And then in here if the task was previously already in the board and it was moved to another column inside of the same board, in that case, what we are doing an update of the employee IDs. We are updating the primary keys of the employee IDs. Sorry, of the employee tasks. So basically, the task previously had a specific employee ID and a specific task ID. And what we are doing is we are changing the correspondence. In this case, we are not changing the task ID because the task is the same, but we are changing the employee ID. Like if I do this, I'm changing the employee ID. If I'm moving in the same level, I'm not changing the employee ID, but at the same time, I'm changing the task phase of this specific task in here. So I'm updating the corresponding task phase. So that's what is doing here. And then this code here is basically to send. So in here, basically what I'm doing is I'm preparing the corresponding resource key, saying which type of action, if it is an update resource, if it is an add resource, or if it is a remove resource. And then I'm passing the corresponding post data that I will send to the server. And then I'm saying on complete function. So if this request gets executed correctly on complete function, basically what I'm doing is in here I am updating the new primary keys. In here, so if I remove, basically what I'm doing here is I'm updating the primary keys only with the task ID. So I'm removing the task phase ID and the employee ID because it's a remove. And now this task is on the availables list. If the task is a new task, so I'm adding the employee ID and the task phase ID into the primary keys of the elements, of the new draggable elements. And if it is an update, I'm simply updating the new primary keys from the new column that I just dropped that draggable element. So basically in here I'm setting the post data and then I'm executing the complete function that I set above. So that's basically what this code is doing. And then obviously if the code gets executed correctly, I am appending the draggable element into the new droppable. That's what I'm doing here. Otherwise I don't do anything and it will show the corresponding errors that we have defined in the corresponding resources. Okay, so this is basically the JavaScript that I copy paste that we have. What we're going to do next is we need to set in this matrix the corresponding resources. So every time that this JavaScript gets executed, it will call the corresponding resources. So I need to select the matrix, and in the matrix I have an add resource, an update resource, and a remove resource. So I need to define these three because are these three that I am calling from the JavaScript. So to do that, I already have that specific code created. So what I'm doing is basically I can show you on this is the PHP code that I just copy paste. Then you can analyze this code if you wish to through the diagram. The system will convert these two diagrams to local diagrams, but basically what it's doing here is inserting a new record into the employee task table. This one, it is updating the old primary keys into with the new primary keys. So when I move from a column to another column inside of the board, and so basically this is the line that does this, and this line here, that's the line that updates the correspondent phase ID, the new phase ID. And then in here, the last one is basically to remove the correspondent task, the employee task, where in here basically I'm just calling the delete function that will delete the record inside of the employee task table. Okay, so I just copy this code here. Basically this code here, what is doing is simply calling already resources that we had defined before. There is nothing new, so it's a very simple code, as you can see. So if now I go here, what I need to do, I need to go to the show advanced items, and in the utils in here, what I want to do is I want to create a new resource that I'm gonna call employee task matrix resource util. employee task matrix, okay. And in here I'll just copy paste this piece of code inside employee task matrix resource util, okay, exactly this. And if I refresh this part, I can see that I already have access to the corresponding elements there in the code, so I can check each element. I can check the corresponding diagram, the local diagram, what is doing. So I can see that the insert basically is calling this specific method in here, passing these variables, attributes that is defined in here, and then if it is putting then the results in a status variable. If this variable it is true, it is setting then the new attributes, so it is setting a new variable, and then it is setting a new variable called the pick keys, and then is calling a new method, the method update, passing that variables they were defined before, and then it will put that result into a status variable and it will return that status. So the same thing for the update and the same thing for the delete. So basically you can analyze what this diagram is doing. Okay, so going back to the previous page, so we can just go back to the show basic items here, and we can open the matrix Scrum page. And what we want to do is to select the matrix here, and we want to define a new resources, which are the add, the update and the remove resource. So we need to go here to the resources and we want to add new resources. As a matter of fact, let's see if we can do this through here to be faster. Where in here I want to have a new resource, but I want this to be object, call object methods. That in here will be the insert. And here I want to pass the variable. In here will be the post of the attributes, and I can remove this one, that doesn't matter. Okay, so I do update. Already have here these specific methods which was created in here. Okay, the methods already here, so I can just change this to something else. So I can put here, this will be, let's call it drag and drop, so DD, and let's put it add. Something like this. And in here we call it this one. Okay, so in here we want to have the update, so we want to call it this time, we want to call the updates. Forgot to add here this part. change this. Okay. And in here will be dirty dates. Okay, it is correct. The updates. So in here, can call it the updates, and the remove will do the same thing. Yeah, since this is the remove, okay. With the delete. Conditions, yeah. Give it the sign. Remove. And we save, and when we refresh, let's do some debug. Let's open the network tab in here. So if I move a task in here, it's not sending anything. Undefined resource did the updates. Okay, let's see why it's not. So the reason why it's not working is because there is something missing in the DD update code. So in the DD update code there is something missing, which is because currently when we drag to the same employee it gives an error, but if we move to another employee it works fine, as you can see here. So what we need to do is, so the reason it's here there is giving an error, so what we need to do is, if this is equal to this, or if the update is successful. So this update returns false because these two are the same. So we need to have a status equal to true when these two are the same, because there will be no change. The change will be in here. So that's what was missing. So now if we refresh the page, now we can see that we can move inside of the same employee, or we can move to another employee. This is just an example. Okay, now if we want to move here, we cannot move. Let's see it why. Okay, saying that we have an error in the DD remove methods. In this method here, basically saying, so in these codes we are calling this delete function from the employee task resource, and it's saying that this doesn't exist. So probably what we need to do is to go in the remove resource for the employee task we need to ask the system to create that for us. So we select the employee task table and we select here remove a record from the employee task table. We do update, we wait until the system does that for us. It did already. Then we can change back to the previous one, which was the remove, and we can erase this record that the system created for us in here. But the point is that the system, if you realize, so if we edit this remove, before the system was complaining saying that there was no function delete inside of this class. So if we go now to our diagram, if we click here in the methods, if we click here edit, now we can see the methods, and before we couldn't. Here it is the method. Okay, so now if we save this, well, there's nothing to save, so if we just refresh the page and if we replicate the previous action, maybe it could be a problem of cache. So let's just erase the cache and let's try to do it again. Okay, yes, it was the cache, it was a cache problem. Okay, so every time that this happens, you have here the flush cache. You can just flush the cache and automatically, because what happened is that, so we had this, so in here I show you. So basically this element here, this delete, was calling. So we need to refresh here. Okay. So this delete method here was calling this delete method here, and this delete method here was calling this delete method here. The problem is that these methods from inside of the logic layer, they are cached, and the cache was not deleted automatically. So in that case we needed to delete manually, but now it's working. Okay, so now let's see if we move something from here to here, if it works. Okay, if it doesn't, let's see why is that. And we have here another problem saying that, okay, there is no insert method, so we need to do the same thing for the insert. So we need to go here to the adds, we can add, for example, another one, and what we want to do here is to ask the system to create a new method in the employee tasks, the insert method. So we do add a record. Okay, the system did it. We just erase from here and erase from the resource tab here too by clicking OK. Okay. And as you can see, there is no method, no resource added in here. Okay, perfect. But the methods are in here. So if you do refresh, you can see now we have an insert that we didn't have before, which this insert will call this insert, and these inserts then will call the insert from here. That if we do refresh, we can see now we have insert here. Now don't forget to delete the cache one more time. Okay, and now if we refresh our page, now everything should be working fine. So we can move from here to here. We can move these guys here. We can move inside of the same employee or to another employee, and we can move back to the availables list. And we can add other tasks, saying task D, move it to this guy here or in here, whatever. And if you finish, you can put here or you can move it here. This is just an example. Additionally, I'm seeing here that the system is showing these no elements available. This is because we can go to the matrix here. If we go to the layers, to the body, we have here a hidden row. which doesn't show here, but basically this row corresponds to the empty items row that currently is hidden. So basically in this case where we don't have any tasks related, so we have an empty list, what we needed to do when we drag in here something in here in our JavaScript codes. So if we go here to show JavaScript, if we select JavaScript in our code here, what we needed to do is on this function, on the move task function, basically when we have this part here, so this resource, when we call the resource add in this complete function here, what we needed to do in here to be something like we needed to get the widgets, the main widgets. Let's see if we did that already. So widgets, which is in here, but we want this to be in here, so it's here. Okay, so we set the widget here, and in here what we want to do is basically to do a query selector that the widget's empty, display equal to none, something like this. Or we could put here empty, and then if this really exists, we hide that specific element. So let's say that we have something like this. It shows the elements, no elements available. When I drag and drop, it shows the correct one. Now it is correct. That's it. That's exactly what we had in here. So basically, of course, we needed to change some of the interfaces things in here. Maybe we could put in here some spacing. So, but the rest, all the functionality basically is done. That's the point. So as you can see, it's very similar with this board in here that we have in here. This is just an example. And that's it. So thank you very much.